So good evening, everyone. I'm Kay Wilson, regulated Canadian immigration consultant with Northern Connections Canada, and I'm going to be doing the webinar with you this evening. Awesome. We delayed our start, as I mentioned, so that we could give everyone an opportunity to join, as some people were having some technical issues joining. So I think those have been resolved. And we will go right ahead with the webinar. Let me know in the chat where you're joining me from today. It's going to be a very interactive session, so I appreciate your participation. Thanks for coming out this evening. All right. So I'm seeing some folks from Jamaica, Trinidad. I'm seeing Barbados, Guyana, St. Lucia, Bahamas. Awesome. Thanks for joining. Good to have you, Grenada. Welcome. So as you can see from the subject, we'll be talking about exploring permanent residence pathways for Canada specifically. We have a lot to cover this evening, and I'm just going to dive right in since we had to delay our start so that everyone could join. Before I do that, though, let me make some quick housekeeping. So if you have questions, I would encourage you to put them in the Q&A so that they're not missed in the chat. There will be moments when we'll keep the chat off for a bit so that the presentation can flow properly and smoothly. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I can't guarantee that we'll have time this evening for questions, especially due to having to delay our start. But we will have a day 2 tomorrow. So this is a 2-day webinar series, where today we'll be talking about permanent residency, and tomorrow we'll be talking about other pathways, such as a pathway of studying in Canada to become a permanent resident. So we'll be talking about studying and working tomorrow. So at the end of that, we will do some Q&A for sure. We'll go through some of the questions. So if you're here this evening, you do not want to miss day 2. There's a reason why it's a series, because the information continues. And so what we covered today and tomorrow kind of flows into each other. So you don't want to miss the 2 days of sessions. Also, you want to ensure that you are keeping up with the session. So if you're here today, I would imagine that you have some desire or goal of moving to Canada, or you're either in Canada and you're looking to remain here permanently, right? With that, I will get started. So if you're here, make sure that you're keeping up with the information that's being shared. Remove all distractions so that you can get the most out of the sessions. We don't do these very often, and so it's a lot of information that you're getting absolutely at no cost to you, right? So definitely make use of the moment here. So I will continue here, and I hope you guys are seeing my screen well. So tonight we're going to look at the different levels of immigration activity in Canada, what Canada plans to do over the next couple of years where immigration is concerned. We're going to look at the different program types. And of course, when I present, I like to also give some case studies so that you can have context to some of the information that's being presented. So I will do that as well. I am Kay Wilson. For those who don't know, I'm sure some of you, most of you should have been joining us for the first time at any, of our webinars. And I am the lead consultant and founder of Northern Connections Canada Immigration. We're an immigration consulting agency located in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. And from here, we serve clients in Canada as well as outside Canada. So we serve clients in over 30 different countries, including the Caribbean region, of course. Very important is the fact that we're regulated. So the regulated meaning we are licensed and are regulated by a professional body. So for those who may not know, only those who are licensed to practice Canadian immigration should actually be practicing or providing any support where Canadian immigration services are concerned. So for your benefit, I have a website on the screen. That is a website that you should visit if you are planning to use the services of an immigration professional to help you with an application for Canada. They must be a member with this body. It's called the College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants, College of Citizenship and Immigration Consultants. And so that is the body that regulates the profession, and anyone that you're using or planning to use or looking to use must be registered and regulated through this body. So they must be licensed. There's actually a public register on the website, and from there you can actually add the licensing information for anyone that you want to work with. So you can plug in their name or their company name. We have our license number on the screen as well. So that's very important. In a lot of cases, I've come across clients who were refused or experienced some sort of negative experience on their journey trying to come to Canada because they are working with unauthorized or unlicensed personnel. So it's very important that you protect your Canadian immigration dream, and you ensure that you are working with the right people who have some level of training and authority to do the work that they're purporting to do. So that's very important. And that is the website there for you. And I'll move on. So a little bit more about me. I am, as I said, regulated Canadian immigration consultant, so RCIC. I'm also a member of CAPIC, which is the Canadian Association of Professional Immigration Consultants. Outside of that, I am licensed through the government of Saskatchewan, where we provide foreign worker, well, we assist with Saskatchewan applications as well, outside of the general scope of immigration Canada-wide, and then also for recruitment of foreign workers. So we assist employers in Saskatchewan to find workers, foreign workers to come to Canada. I am also a member of the CPA Canada, and through that I assist newcomers. So we actually prepare classes for newcomers called financial literacy classes for those who are, well, for anyone in Canada really, but a lot of newcomers actually benefit from these classes where we provide them with financial literacy training to help them to settle in Canada and learn about Canadian finances and the different topics that will impact you as an immigrant. And so I do a lot, and with all of these, they somehow come together in a synergy. So I'm able to help with different aspects of the immigration journey. So I will touch on some fun facts about Canada you may or may not know. Canada is the largest country in North America. So North America, meaning the US, Canada, and Mexico, that's what makes up North America. And Canada is the largest in North America by land size, and also the second largest country in the world. Also by land size, because the population isn't that great, right, compared to some of these other countries. Canada is also the third largest oil reserve holder in the world. So Canada produces a lot of oil. Home to the longest street in the world. Some of you may or may not know. So that's a street in Ontario, Yonge Street. The longest coastline and international land border. And this is a border that's shared with the United States. And also, of course, Canada, as you may or may not know, it's also cold. The coldest temperature on record in Canada is actually held in one of the territories. It's called the Yukon, and that's about -63. So it gets pretty cold. We've been having a cold snap here as well over the last few days. So the temperatures have been really, really low. You may have heard also of Canada's loonie. So the loonie being the $1 in Canada, and then the toonie being $2. So that's something that's unique to Canada as well. In terms of immigration wise, right? So Canada, of course, has a multicultural population with We are currently over a little bit over 40 million people in terms of population, and that is mostly attributable to immigration for the most part. Immigrants actually make up a great percentage of Canada's growing population, and the vast majority of the growth in the last number of years has been due to immigration for the most part. Canada, of course, adopts a policy of diversity with over 200 ethnicities and has a long history of immigration. About 75% of Canada's population growth, as I mentioned, comes from immigration, right? So that's very significant. They depend on immigration. But some things are changing, and I might touch on some of these things tonight. But generally, Canada needs immigrants. So it's not going anywhere. Some years you'll find that numbers are going to be higher. Some years it might be lower, depending on what's happening politically. That has a huge implication, I would say, for immigration levels. But generally, Canada needs immigration. So I have a poll, you guys, tonight. I'd love to hear I'd love to see your responses, and I'll launch that poll. I'll give you about a minute to respond, and then we'll move on. So the poll tonight is, why do you want to come to Canada? And I know it might be different for each person. And it will also give me a good idea of how much I should cover tonight, or how vast or how in-depth should I go in some of these topics. So we'll take another minute to finish that up. So I'm seeing live and work. Okay. I'm seeing, for the most part, about 80% of respondents are saying they are coming to Canada, or they want to come to Canada for better quality of life. About 6%, not a lot, says world-class education for their children. About 9%, safety and security. Hey, interesting. All right. So I would say for the vast majority, it's better quality of life. And then we have safety and security, and then education for children. All right, awesome. So I am gonna go to my next slide, which tells you guys about generally what we see. What are some of the reasons why folks want to come to Canada? And as I said, it will look different for each person, but I think it's along the same lines as what you would have responded. So essentially a fresh start, right? When you think of, especially now in a new year, you're planning ahead, you're planning for the future. And for some people, that might mean just getting a fresh start in a new country. Canada will definitely come with a lot of opportunities for career growth. That is the whole point of why immigration is important to Canada, because there is the Canadian economy, which is growing, and its growth also depends on immigration, having people in the Canadian workforce, of course, who are contributing to economic development, and of course, the tax base, right? So there are opportunities for career advancement and development, and which is why you'll find that employers look overseas sometimes for their workforce, because there are some things that they might, or some talent, skills they may not be able to get in Canada. And also the government uses immigration to plan for the future. So they may be able to see based on statistics. So Statistics Canada releases a lot of data every year. And based on what they're seeing in terms of the trends in employment and the demand for a labor force, that influences the immigration levels, right? And in all cases, it's all about meeting labor. There's never been a case where that was not one of the key issues: meeting labor needs and filling the gaps with some of the labor shortages. So of course, if it's a career move for you, then you can definitely find success in Canada as a result. Some people want diversity. They want a multicultural scene or atmosphere to live in and to grow their children. We talked about, and then all of this contributes, like I said, the majority said a better quality of life, right? So all of this, I think, will contribute overall to that better quality of life, which sometimes it's hard to really quantify, right? Access to free healthcare. We say free, it's free because you don't pay, but of course your taxes actually funds healthcare. But currently in Canada, in all provinces, healthcare is provided provincially, so it's not something that you pay for per se. Education, so your children, as long as your child is going to a public school in Canada, you would not be paying as a permanent resident, right? If you're coming, and today we're talking about permanent residents. There, a lot of people, again, same topic, safety. They come to Canada because they want to feel relatively safe. I don't think anywhere will be absolutely safe, especially in the world that we live in today, but we can definitely say generally Canada is considered safe. And of course, with coming to Canada, Canada is one of those countries that will provide social benefits. So this is where when you file your taxes, you know, as a resident, you can benefit from different tax benefits that are available to residents of Canada. And some of them might include like a GST payment. So GST is Canada's Goods and Services Tax. So there are some members of the population or residents who may qualify. All of these are very different. And child benefits. So once you are a resident of Canada, meaning a permanent resident, Canadian citizen, even some temporary residents like students or workers, over time, after a while, they would qualify for some of these as well. So children, you'll be able to get, once you have a child under age 18, regardless of income and so on, there will be child benefits that are paid monthly as well. So those are just some of the things that over time we have seen and people highlight as things that are pull factors for them where Canada is concerned. So I'm going to touch on Canada's immigration levels. And so what I have here on the screen is Canada's immigration levels plan for this year, 2024, all the way through to 2026. So a 3-year period. And this represents the number of immigrants that Canada plans to welcome. And this is just under one of the broad categories. So because we're touching on permanent residents, I'm looking at the economic class categories of permanent residencies. Okay, these are the various programs, as we can see for 2024, and I'll just go to my next slide. So just in terms of highlights, so this particular immigration levels plan was released back in November 2023. And with this plan, Canada aims to welcome 485,000 new permanent residents in 2024. So that's this year. By 2025, that number should be stabilized. So they're going to cap it at 500,000 for each of 2025 and 2026, right? So the numbers are still very high compared to historical numbers. Generally, in gone by, you'd see the numbers being in the 200,000, somewhere there. So over the last year or two, they have significantly, I would say about 2 years, they have significantly increased the number of permanent residents that they're planning on accepting. With a particular plan, the government wants to prioritize economic growth and support family reunification. So there's a section there, right? Like I said, I'm just looking at economic immigration, but there is a section in the immigration plan for family reunification under family class programs. So that's also one of the pillars of Canada's immigration system. So they always have to have an for family class application. The plan also recognizes, and one of the things that they highlighted is that immigrants play an important role in the labor market and growing the Canadian economy. There has been, especially over the last couple of months, there has been some struggles, I would say, some issues within the economy generally, where you may hear of it when you read and you research and all of that. You may hear of issues in housing and, healthcare, which is why we're going to touch on that. Like healthcare occupations are one of those that are being prioritized as a result. So with the influx of permanent residents to Canada, and not just permanent residents, but also temporary residents, students and workers who are coming to Canada, there is, and with the steep increase in the number of people living in Canada, so the general population, you will find that it puts a strain on housing. So if you are admitting, X number of people, but at the same time, the housing infrastructure is not being built out, that's going to cause a strain on the system as well as housing prices. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. It's more prominent in larger cities, larger centers, like in Ontario. So Toronto, of course, the majority of migrants to Canada tend to want to go to Toronto. So you'll find that between and Vancouver, the larger cities, you're going to see the impacts of this even more. So you'll find that the housing situation in those places, the housing prices are very high. And of course, if housing prices are high, it means more people will be renting, which also tends to, there's a demand for housing. And that also pushes up rental costs. So that's what's happening in these major centers. The impacts are felt differently across Canada. But like I said, for the smaller cities, small, mid-sized centers, it's not as acute as what you would hear for those larger centers. But as I mentioned, the government, which is why they decided to stabilize the numbers in 2025 and 2026. So we're seeing that 500,000 cap so that they can better plan for immigration with other infrastructure that's needed for the number of people that are coming to Canada. That being said, one of the reports that we're seeing currently is that there's a projection that over the next, within the next 10 years or so, the labor market growth rate in Canada will be negative. So essentially, there will be more people retiring from the Canadian labor force than people coming, than what we have here. So there will be a lot more people that are retiring than the number of people that are participating in Canada's labor market. And as a result, they have to continue with immigration. They're trying to stabilize the numbers so that they can better plan infrastructure, but at the same time, they have to balance the influx of people with the demands for the labor market and the economy. It brings me back to my point, which is that Canada needs immigrants, right? So immigration is a key factor in having the thing, which is having the force. Also, Canada's birth rate has also declined over the years. So a lot less children are being born to people already living here. So again, the age of population and the turnover of the population. So there are sectors that have been identified by the government that are critical. And so they're using the immigration programs to bring people to Canada to fill labor gaps in these particular sectors. So one is healthcare. One is STEM. So STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We have trades, transportation, and agriculture. So those are the critical sectors that have been identified this year. Well, I would say and so this year we see those same sectors identified as being critical. In addition, there may be others that are added. So the plan for the government is to visit this every year to determine what sectors are critical for immigration, and they can use the immigration system to drive of immigrants that have experience in these particular sectors. So, and sectors are determined by consultation with different stakeholders, so including employers and the different provinces and all of those things. Another target that they have is attracting individuals with French knowledge. So people who speak French, essentially. So you're going to find that if you fall into any of these brackets, it's all as though your chances of coming to Canada through permanent residency programs would increase significantly compared to others, right? These just reflecting the current priorities, but it's not the full picture of all that will be invited, of course. And if I go back to the plan, you'll see they do have some of the programs listed under the economic immigration stream. So we have the federal high skilled, which will touch on those programs that will fall under federal high skills programs. We have federal business programs. So Canada does have business immigration streams as well. And then there are some pilots that are also going to contribute to the numbers. We have the Atlantic Immigration Program, which previously was a pilot, but has now been made a permanent program. And then, of course, we have the provincial nominee programs. So that's a broad overview. And I'll just keep going here. So in addition to I just mentioned that Canada is looking to stabilize immigration levels, we continue to see the numbers very high. So for last year only, last year again was a historical year. So and to that in 2022, a record was set. And then in 2023, the numbers were even higher. So Canada would have welcomed over 465,000 new permanent residents just last year. So that's pretty significant. Like I said previously, the numbers would have been maybe half of that, right? So they have significantly increased those. Express entry and the provincial nominee programs are going to be key areas to focus on if you are looking to come to Canada as a permanent resident. You will see from even the table that we looked at that the vast majority of allocation of the numbers, the targeted numbers are allocated to these particular programs. So the programs in Express Entry, as well as the different provincial nominee programs. They continue to target occupational groups. So they have targeted occupational draws. They call them category-based draws. And we touched on that a little bit, but I'll touch on it later. And then, of course, there is a lot more interest in coming to Canada. So you're finding that a lot more people are in the program pools. There's a lot more. So if you are here tonight and your goal is to migrate to Canada, regardless of whether it's in your short or long-term goal, you definitely want to work on it almost right away. So as soon as you think you might be ready or might be interested, you want to start working on that, because the number of people that are interested in migrating to Canada has significantly increased even since COVID. Significant increases in the composition and the number of people in the program pools waiting to be selected. So, and with that increased interest, it's becoming a lot more competitive. So the moment that you qualify, you definitely want to begin the process. Okay, so I have here, there are over 80 immigration programs, and there is actually more than that. They have introduced a number of different programs over the last couple of years. So it has it's definitely more than 100 programs, different pathways, some of which might be available to people globally. So meaning you can apply from outside Canada, while some programs might be limited to those who are inside Canada. So sometimes, and that's why when we work with clients, we look at different strategies. For some, it might mean applying from where you are straight off the bat, while others, it may mean coming to Canada temporarily through a temp to perm pathway. So where you come to Canada temporarily and then you access permanent residence programs from within Canada. So it may look different for each person, and it will largely depend on your background and your individual situation. Becoming a permanent resident it look different for each person. It can take a few months. It can take up to 2 years. It just depends on is applying, your background, the pro that you've applied under. Different factors, really. Lots of different factors. It's usually a more longer term approach, I would say, but they have been significantly reducing the processing times for most applications from what I'm seeing. Okay, so this brings me to my next poll. I'll go ahead and launch that. So I'm going to launch poll number 2. So this poll is asking, where are you now in the immigration process? I'll give you maybe 1 minute to answer this and then we'll move on. So I'm seeing, so 40% of you say that you are researching. Please don't get stuck in the research phase for too long. That's my one advice where that's concerned. I'll end the poll and I'll look at the results. So yeah, about 39%, I think it's a tie. So 39% of respondents say that they are researching. Like I said, don't get stuck in research phase for too long. I've seen clients, I remember I had a client who had come to us for support with applying, and she was researching for about 9 years. So can you imagine what could have happened in that 9 years time? That's a very long time to be researching. And with that delay, programs change. So I can tell you, I might be presenting to you today about these particular programs, and I could be presenting to you maybe later in the year, and I might be presenting a completely different thing because of the nature of immigration. These are government programs and policies, so they tend to change. They will change based on what's happening politically. They'll change, if the government changes, chances are immigration policies will change somewhat. Will Canada stop needing immigrants? No, but the policies can also change. And they usually do change as a result. And then, like I said, if the programs are used to drive labor force, so depending on what's happening in Canada's labor market and the economy in general, that will, of course, also impact immigration policies, right? So definitely don't get stuck researching. It's best to have an idea or a picture of what's required, and then you can move forward based on that. But don't get stuck in that research phase. Then I see another 39% looking for assistance with getting started. So with that assistance to get started, you do need to know, again, where do you fall in terms of which program are you aware which program you may qualify for, and what strategy may work for based on your family and your personal goals. So those are some of the questions that you want to have answered. I have 13% that have not started. There's about 7% have profiles in different programs. And then we have a few who are just curious. Awesome. So I will continue. So I have here a case study, which is a past client of mine, James. James came to Canada with his wife and his 2 children. He worked as a teacher for many years before coming to Canada, right? So this is one of those persons who wanted a change, right? So we talked about a fresh new start. So he was able to, from working with us, we were able to find a program for him where he could have applied based on his occupation. So based on his occupation as a teacher being in demand, we were able to apply for him through one of the provincial, in this case, it would have been a provincial nominee program. And he was able to apply, come to Canada. When he came to Canada, though, he was in fact working in a different occupation. So he was doing something different than what he was doing back home, essentially. And I mentioned that because when you come to Canada, if you come be working in a particular occupation or industry, it does not necessarily mean that when you get here, you have to work in the same field, doing the same job. That can change, right? So there's no hard and fast rule on that you were a teacher in your home country. So when you come to Canada, you have to work as a teacher. In fact, for teachers, there is actually a licensing process in Canada before you can teach in Canada, right? So depending on the occupation, there will be some professional requirement, professional work experience or licensing, depending on the area in which you work. So those are things to also become familiar with before coming. And also those requirements based on different programs, requirements for the different occupations or professions may be different based on where you're going. So remember, Canada has different provinces. So each province may have a different requirement. So I'll move on from that. So I'm going to talk about the federal immigration programs, and then we'll go into some different ones from here. So these are the ones I want to highlight today. So we have the Federal Skilled Worker Program, which is Federal Skilled Trades Program, and then we have one called the Canadian Experience Class. So these three combined are what forms the Express Entry system. So the Express Entry is just a general system, and then in Express Entry, we have these three programs, right? So those are the three programs for Express Entry, and I'll touch on them a little bit high level. Outside of this, we have, like I mentioned, we have a self-employed programs. Self-employed, for those, this particular self-employed program is for those who are self-employed or who can establish themselves as self-employed in Canada in the arts, culture, or sports. So this is particularly for those people in those areas. So arts, culture, sports, if they work in, and there's actually a list of occupations that will fall under this particular category. So you might have like journalists, or maybe you have an artist. They're different as anything that might fall within that broader area. Athletes, of course, people working in certain cultural programs or areas. You might have a filmmaker. You might have, like I mentioned, journalists. You might have like a sports journalist. You could be in a particular area, a particular niche area, and still be a part of that. We might have musicians that would fall under that as well. So anything that's in that general area. Quebec Skilled Worker Program is for those who are looking to go to Quebec. And of course, if you want to migrate to Quebec, you need to speak French, right? So Quebec is Canada's French province. So they manage their own immigration program. So they're the only province that manages their own immigration programs independently. And so to migrate to Quebec, you need to speak French. There's the Atlantic Immigration Program, which is a really great program for those who can secure job offers in Canada within the Atlantic region. So it's a program that spans the Atlantic provinces in Canada. Atlantic provinces, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland and Labrador, and PEI. So it's for those who want, it's an employer-driven program, right? So employers would support your application to this particular program because the idea is that you're coming to work with them, and it provides you with two things. So it allows you to work temporarily, so you can obtain an initial work permit and then subsequently apply for permanent residence with that same document. So those same documents. So essentially, it's a multifaceted program. So it allows you to obtain a work permit in addition to applying for permanent residence. The programs to mention, and remember when I started, I said there's quite a bit. So we had on the screen over 80, but I told you right now it's closer to more like over 100. These are just some of the federal ones that I'm highlighting. The bulk of the programs, though, will be at the provincial level, but these are some of the federal ones. Have the Home Support Worker Pilot and the Home Child Care Provider Pilot. These are for people who want to work as like a nanny or caregiver in the home, taking care of children, or taking care of the elderly, or people who are sick, stuff like that. These are pilots. They open annually in January. So they actually just open at the start of this month. I know the home childcare provider pilot closed within a day of opening. They both have caps, but that one in particular has the greater demand. So generally, once it opens, it closes right away. It allows people with work experience and a job in these particular areas to apply for a work permit initially, and then also once they're in Canada, the opportunity to apply for permanent residence. So it's similar to the Atlantic program, where it offers you the ability to apply for both work permit and permanent residence. There's a startup visa, which is a program for investors, really. So if you want to invest in a business in Canada through that particular program, there is the Rural and Northern Immigration Program. This is actually a pilot. And the goal of this particular one is to, just as the name suggests, rural and northern. So essentially, it's meant to bring immigrants to certain rural and northern communities in Canada that need skilled workers. So it's at the community level. There are participating communities in different provinces. And once a candidate can obtain an offer of employment in one of these communities, then that's where the process would start. Again, it provides the opportunity for an initial work permit as well as an application for permanent residence. So it will always be like 2 applications for work permit initially to come to Canada, and then an application for permanent residence. Generally, when you're applying for permanent residence, of course, your entire family would be, your nuclear family, that is, be included on that application, right? And the next one is the agri-food pilot. Remember, I talked about agriculture being one of those areas that are critical sectors right now. And so this is one of those programs that facilitate agricultural workers, and they're becoming a permanent resident in Canada after. So Express Entry, as I mentioned before, it's really the flagship system, Canada, for the federal government level. It's an online application management system. You are submitting an expression of interest to come to Canada. And then following that, they do bi-weekly draws from the particular program, the particular pool, I should say. And those candidates that are drawn from the pool are then invited to apply for permanent residence. So essentially, that's in a nutshell how the system works. And this is actually a Government of Canada illustration of how Express Entry should work. So essentially going into a pool and then being drawn by getting an invitation and then applying for permanent residence online. So with Express Entry, as I mentioned, they have category-based draws. And these have really taken off this year. So one is French language proficiency. So if you know or can learn French, it can work to your benefit. But before, even if you don't already know it, of course, I wouldn't say just blanketly go and learn it. I would first say, well, determine where you need to start, determine what programs you qualify for. Will French even help you? I think French will always help, though, because we are different programs, like they have Francophone immigration programs that you can actually come to Canada on by virtue of knowing French, like being a French speaker. With Francophone immigration as well, it exempts you from certain government processing, like LMIAs that will be required for a job offer. So French language knowledge is always good. But before doing anything, I always recommend knowing where you fall, like determining what programs you qualify for, and how do you proceed from there? What documents do you need to work on and stuff like that? So those are some of the things that we provide guidance on through consultations, and I'll talk more about that later. The second one is healthcare occupations. Once you work in healthcare and you can get into the Express Entry pool, It's highly recommended. I've had a few actually, clients who work in healthcare, nurses and other, support staff. We might have caregivers. They call them, there's a different term for them here, but generally you might know it as caregivers. You have LPNs and different support. There's a whole long list actually of healthcare occupations that if you have with category-based jobs, if you can get in the express entry pool and have these particular type of work experience, at least one, on your profile, it can make you eligible for these specific category of jobs within the pool. So in the particular pool, the express entry pool, they have the general jobs where they're just pulling generally from the pool, right, based on your score. And then outside of that, they will do these segmented draws, which are just pulling from a certain segment of the pool based on your occupation, right? And you being able to be in these critical sectors or have experience in these critical sectors that are needed for Canada. I had recently a client who is a nurse, for example. She's from St. Lucia, and she was invited in multiple draws. So she got at least 2 express entry invitations, and she got at least 3 provincial letters. So this is where the provinces express an interest in a particular candidate. So she got quite a bit of interest, and so she was able to choose what she wanted to do. And her case was so unique too, but that just is an example of how some occupations are in demand. And so if you work in healthcare, then it is definitely a good time to migrate to Canada if you can get yourself in line for sure. That's just one reason. I'm just telling you about that example because it's so recent, but she got a number of different invitations, so she could choose really where she wanted to go. And right now her application is, we have science, technology, engineering, and math, so STEM occupations. If your job falls in any of these categories, then you would also be able to be considered for these occupational category-based draws. We have trade occupations, so carpenters, plumbers, electricians, you name it, those, they would fall under that category. We have transport workers, pilots. We have truck drivers as well, though some truck drivers may not qualify for express entry. It just depends on their profile. And then, of course, agriculture, which is a broad category. So I have another poll here for you, which I am going to share. I'm just going to launch that. So I want to know from you all, where in Canada do you plan to live? Do you have any idea of where you want to go when you come to Canada? I'll give you guys a minute to do that. All right, so I think we're kind of all over Canada today. But of course, we're seeing some provinces, as per usual, will have larger numbers and greater interest. So I am gonna end the poll. So what I'm seeing here, so about 41% of you are looking to go to Ontario. So I'm not surprised there. Ontario usually takes up a greater share of the immigrant population. Newcomers coming to Canada. Then we have that followed by Alberta, which is 22%. Saskatchewan at 13%, which is, I think, high for Saskatchewan generally. We have British Columbia, 7%, and Manitoba at 6%. And then the rest are kind of scattered a little bit lower. So pretty interesting. If you ask me where you should go, would be another question. What I would recommend. But we can touch on that, I suppose, as time permits. New Brunswick. Yes, I see Gail saying New Brunswick. New Brunswick had like 6%, actually. Okay, so interesting. We're actually going to touch now on provincial programs, which is why I wanted to see where everybody was thinking of going. As you may or may not know, with provincial programs, if you are nominated by a particular province, it means when you come to Canada, you must land in that province. So you have to go to that province when you come to Canada, right? So the expectation is that you will, at least initially, doesn't mean that you'll have to stay there indefinitely, but you at least need to settle or attempt to settle in that province initially. So most of the provinces, like the ones I have on the screen, they do have provincial nominee programs that just as with the federal immigration programs, the individual provinces will have their own allocation of based on the number of permanent residents that they can admit. So that 100, I think it was 110,000 that we saw for provincial allocations, that will be split in between the different provinces. Some might have more depending on their population, of course. And then with the provincial allocations, the provinces will then, they have different immigration streams through which they invite candidates to apply for permanent residence. So I'm going to touch on the types of provincial programs. So we have what are called base immigration programs and then enhanced programs. So we have some that are done through Express Entry. So in the that they are aligned with Express Entry. And we have others that are outside of Express Entry, completely outside. And really, whichever one you apply to, it's not going to be so much so about where you want to go. So I think, that's why I asked that question initially. You might want to throw that through the door. Because based on the immigration landscape right now, it's really going to be about where skills needed, which provinces are looking for people with experience, in the area that I have. For example, with the base programs, you'll see occupations in demand. For occupations in demand, you'll have, similar to what I just went through with the Express Entry and the federal programs, right? You'll have some programs that are occupations in demand through provinces. So an example would be Saskatchewan, for example, would have an occupation in demand category. And so as long as you qualify and meet all other, eligibility requirements by virtue of having experience in one of these particular occupations that they have as being in demand, then you could apply through that program without having a job or anything in that particular province. So some of these programs are really good. The other one is connection to a province. So there are some provinces, an example would be Manitoba, where they require you to have a connection in that particular province in order to apply. Then other programs may be like programs that require arranged employment, meaning you would have had to secure employment in the particular province before being eligible to apply. So different categories. And so what you apply for will just depend on what you qualify for. And that's why I said it may not be where you really want to go, but if this is what I qualify for and I'm not seeing anything else, then I'm just going to go with this one. So that's kind of like the mindset that you want to have for sure with this particular process. Canada's immigration has really, changed over the years, and it's now more of a needs-based, program. So it's like what economy need right now, and who can we get to fill these needs or this labor gap that we have, as opposed to people just coming generally to go wherever. It's now they're trying to match people coming with the need Canada has, economic need. Enhanced programs, which are aligned with Express Entry. So remember I said with Express Entry, within that system, we have 3 programs, the Federal Skilled Workers, Skilled Trades, and Canadian Experience Class. So in addition to that, there are provincial nominee programs that also happen in program draws that happen through Express Entry as well. So again, another great reason, as you saw from the beginning, we know most of the allocations for for the economic immigration programs are between these two systems, so provincial nominee programs and express entry. So if you can be in both, that would be great. All right, so I think I probably already answered, but I would want to hear from you in the chat. What do you think? Is the myth or a fact? You need an offer of employment in order to come to Canada as a permanent resident or through the provincial programs. Okay, so I'm seeing mixed responses. All right. So I see, I think for the most part, most people are saying it's a myth. It is in fact a myth. You do not need an offer of employment in order to migrate to Canada. All right. So, and just as I would have covered previously, I mentioned the different, provincial streams, and with express entry, it's all about, for these particular programs, they call them high skills streams, right? It's all about your skills. It's all about your experience that you can bring to the table, that you have already acquired. It doesn't necessarily mean that because this is where your experience is, just as I explained before, it doesn't mean that that's where you have to go, but that's the basis on which you're applying, all right? Because they are skilled worker programs. And I'm just going to go through quickly some of the different characteristics of permanent residency programs. So this would cover all the programs that I've touched on so far. So through express entry, and then through the other federal immigration programs that I mentioned, high level, and then the provincial program. So most programs are points-based, not all, but most. And then points are allocated for different factors. And I'll touch on some of the factors for which you get points. So it's all going to be about your points for some programs. And then, like I said, with the category-based draws, it's not so much about points, but it's about experience in those categories. Goal of the overall, going into the pool is to maximize your points and thereby maximizing your chances of getting drawn. You can only have one profile in each of the various pools, and time is a factor. Just as I mentioned before, there's greater interest in coming to Canada. Programs change all the time, so the eligibility requirements may change. So time is always a factor, plus your age is also, there's so many things, right? Different factors at play. So time is a huge factor. One of the things that we saw, for example, it's not related to permanent residency, but I think it's a really great example. We would have had a lot of people who had an interest in coming through the pathway of studying to become permanent residents eventually. So that's one of those temporary pathways, and we'll touch on that tomorrow. But you would have seen the requirements for funds would have changed significantly just with a couple of weeks of announcement. So they didn't even give a lot of notice to applicants, and they don't have to, right? So things change for a lot of people drastically with that announcement. So in the same way with other programs, they can make changes overnight, and then, what do you do at that point? So that's why you always have to think about that time factor. I may do a consultation with you today, and you don't take any action until maybe a year or two later. The things that I may have shared with you before would have changed, and so we would have to reassess to see what's going on. Are the current recommendations still standing, or should we be looking at other things? And how has your situation changed since then? So one of the factors is work experience, right? So this one is a no-brainer based on the fact that we're talking about skilled workers and certain occupations. So most programs require at least 1 year of work experience in the past 10 years. So the fact we're now in 2024, we can only go back as far as 2014 with work experience. So at least 1 year within that period. Must be paid professional experience, no internships. Full-time, so at least for where immigration is concerned, they consider at least 30 hours per week, full-time. And then part-time, at least 15 hours per week. So 30 hours per week over 1 year, and then part-time would be half of that over a longer period, so 2-year period. And then the more work experience, the more points up to a certain maximum, right? So the people with more work experience, they might get more points. These people are also more attractive for some of the provincial nominee programs that allocate more points for work experience. Those with less work experience, maybe Express Entry might be a better one in terms of program pathway. So language ability is the other factor. So I know based on our surveys of where you guys are joining me from today, I know you all are English speakers, you are the majority from an English speaking country. But guess what? Canada still requires an English language assessment. And it's not gonna be, I don't recommend just jumping and doing the test or doing an English language test. You definitely want to know where you fall in terms of programs. Do you need to do the test right now, or is it something that you'll do later? It will depend ultimately on the particular program that you will be proceeding with or that you will qualify for. So I don't recommend just going ahead and jumping to do an English language test. I see a lot of people do this, and sometimes by the time we start working with them, they would know that, oh, I did an English language test, and when you look at it, it's expired, it was never used. And remember, you have to pay for this, right? You have to pay for the test. So you want to plan properly and make sure that when you do need it, you can get it done, but don't do it before you know that you need it, is what I'm saying. It does have a validity period. So you want to demonstrate proficiency in one or both of Canada's official languages, so French or English. The scores that are required will also differ based on the program. So the minimum scores for a language, you have to do the test if you're applying to a program that requires language proficiency. So it's, regardless of where you're from. So points are generally weighed heavily for language skills or language ability, especially for Express Entry. Acceptable tests include IELTS, so IELTS and CELPIP. If I were to make a recommendation on the two, CELPIP would be the one that most people do better at, but it's not as widely available as IELTS. They are both, like I said, both accepted. And as I said before, the first point I made, not recommended to write the language test before knowing program eligibility. So you want to know which program you're going to apply for first before, going to sign up and do a language test. You want to know what are you aiming for? What's your target and all of that? And do you even need to do it right away? I think ultimately for permanent residency, well, again, it depends on the stream. So for example, if you're under a family class stream, you wouldn't need to do it, right? So that's why I said you want to make sure that you're aware of what's required and what's not. And let me just have open the Q&A so that I'll touch on some of the questions as I go along. So the next one is education. There's no minimum education requirement for coming to Canada for most programs, but I do recommend at least a bachelor's degree or an associate degree to start. Anything less than that, you're not going to be competitive. Remember, I said the programs are getting way more competitive because of the number of interests that Canada is getting across the globe. So you want to make sure that you are competitive. So if you are starting with anything less than bachelor's or an associate of some sort, I probably would recommend another pathway and not any of these permanent residency programs straight off the bat. The higher level of education, the more points, and sometimes we can combine different, education credentials completed to help with points. There will be an educational credential assessment that's required to claim points for education that's completed outside of Canada. If the program is done inside Canada, then there's no assessment required, but if it's done outside, you do need to do it. There are 5 agencies that are approved to do the assessment, and the one that you choose will just depend on, generally most of them can do assessments for anyone, but there are some occupations that will require a particular assessment. So for example, those who are in medicine, so like doctors, for example, they'll have to go through the Medical Council of Canada. We have pharmacists who will have to go through a particular body as well. And there are other professions like lawyers who you don't have a specific assessment agency that you have to work with, but there are some that might give you a more favorable assessment of your legal education compared to others, just based on my experience working with different clients. So you want to know what is required for your particular occupation. Generally, most people can go through WES, but like I said, it's not for everyone. Then there is proof of funds. So with migrating to Canada, we have a requirement for proof of funds. And this proof of funds is another way of saying settlement funds. So these are funds that are set by the amounts are set by the government of Canada and are required for most programs. These are funds that will help you and your family that's coming with you to get settled in Canada. It's not, there's no way around it. You have to be able to demonstrate that you have sufficient funds. The only way that, and I'll give you an example shortly, where a client was able to overcome the proof of funds requirement. I'll give you an example shortly, but generally you do need to show that you have your settlement funds. And the amount that you need will vary by applicant, and they can be, your proof of funds can be shown in different ways, and it can also be gifted, right? But you just have to demonstrate that you have the funds. So the amount that's needed will be based on your family size. So this is a table here that will show you in Canadian dollars how much is needed for permanent residency programs based on your family size. And when you're thinking of your family size, so the number of family members applying, this will include yourself. So you count yourself and see the chat here. So you count yourself as well as your nuclear, so your spouse or common law partner and dependent children who are under 22. So that will be your family size. All right. So based on that, you would have an idea of what's required. Can everyone see the table? Great. All right. So that's the amount for proof of fund, and these are like minimum amounts. So depending on your family size, you'll have to demonstrate the minimum. And this is the same as whether the family will be coming with you to Canada or not. It doesn't change. So I have here an example for Kumar, which is a client from Trinidad, a former client. He worked as a cook back home, and he decided that he wanted to migrate to Canada. He was able to come the proof of funds requirement through a program here in Saskatchewan. So it's they have different ones, but this particular one was an employer job offer program. So it allowed him to do two things: to apply for a work permit to initially start working. So he's applying for, it's a provincial nominee program. So he applied for a work permit and then also applied for permanent residence. At the time, for a single applicant, the amount for proof of funds was $13,213, and it was waived because he had a job offer with an employer through that particular program. So we saw that for one person, it was 13 at the time. It's still 13, just a little bit more. So they do increase it every year. At least they've started to do that. But it's not a significant increase. Generally, it increases in line with numbers or guidelines that are released by Statistics Canada. They have this thing called a low income cutoff. So it's basically reflecting how much you would need to survive in Canada based on the number of families. So it's like a percentage of that. and it's set at the federal government level. So regardless of the province, the amount for your proof of funds will be the same. So one of the myths that we often hear people with as well is that I'm too old. I'm too old to come to Canada. I'm not even gonna, start this process because it's probably not gonna work. There's usually that fear factor because of course it's the unknown. You're going into new territory, a new country. Most people who are coming to Canada can generally tell you they don't have any relatives in Canada or they don't know anyone in Canada, right? But they're coming with their families or some of them single. They're coming to Canada to because they want to move to Canada for whatever reasons. So a lot of these people too, especially the ones once they pass 40 above, then there is that sense of a little bit more because and also them thinking that it might not work. They may not get through with the different programs because of age. I can tell you my oldest client, when we started the process with her, she was 50. She was already 50. She's here now. She has been here for about 2 years. And we're still going through some processing with her. But just to show you, she came with that initial apprehension that I'm just going to try it. My sister is doing it. Her younger sister was migrating, working with us. And so she recommended her. So she came and she said, well, just tell me what to do. She was not very optimistic about the process because of her age, but she was willing to try. And so with her willingness, we were able to work with her. She was able to come, bring in her, she had one dependent child that was coming with her. So they both were able to come. In her case, she had to do an initial program before starting the permanent residency process, right? But yeah, it worked out well for her. Her application was approved in the first time applying, was approved, it was successful. She herself was very shocked because, like I said, she came into the process being fearful that it's not going to work. I had another client who was closer to 50, was already in Canada, tried many different pathways, many different programs, and it wasn't working. And when we started working with her, there were a few introductions in terms of programs that the government announced, and we jumped on it right away with her. And right now she is a permanent resident of Canada looking to apply for Canadian citizenship. So it is very possible. Age is one of the factors that you see especially in a system like Express Entry. Express Entry tends to penalize you as you age, so it reduces your points for age, but it doesn't necessarily mean that because you may have lost age points and so on, that Canada is not in the future, not in the works for you, right? Not in the books. You can definitely still, you just have to be open to trying different avenues. All right, so that's what I have to say on that. It is possible. So I'll go to the age points. So all programs will have age points, right? We find that, as I mentioned, for Express Entry, age points tend to fall significantly as you age. So as a matter of fact, by the time you are at age 30 with Express Entry, you would have lost 5 points, right, for age. Federal programs tend to allocate maximum points for age between age 20 to about it's really 30, no? And then it falls each year in line with particular programs. So it falls each year as you age. The PNP, the provincial nominee programs, tend to allocate more points for more mature people, actually. So they don't penalize you essentially. They tend to allocate age points on a scale. So with you aging each year, it does not affect your points once you're within that scale. So they have like different scales. So it can be a lot easier for some folks with provincial programs compared to express entry. It all just depends, like I said, on the individual. But there are different programs that can facilitate different situations. I can say, especially within the last year, we had quite a bit of clients who are within that 40 to 50 bracket. Like I said, the oldest in the last year was 50. The oldest so far was 50, but within the last year, a significant number of people, because you have a lot of families who experienced and they have children and they want to migrate with their children. A lot of them are going to be over 40 and they're migrating, and they're able to come and bring their children along. And then, of course, you have those in their 20s who have some work experience and also might want to come to Canada to permanently or to study or to work temporarily, different situations. So there are additional points that can be had as well for having relatives in Canada. It's not a requirement. Like I said before, I can tell you the vast majority of people who are moving don't have relatives or any connection to Canada. Previous work or studies in Canada can help with additional points as well as securing employment. But these are, as it says, additional points. It's not anything that's mandatory, but it can contribute to your points depending, and it also depends on the program. So it may not be applicable for every single program. And some additional application tips here. So licensing, as I mentioned before, some occupations may have licensing requirements. And so you want to be aware of these. There are some things that you can do before you come that can help you with starting that process. And so you want to be familiar with any requirements for your particular occupation if you work in a regulated field. You want to start early. So if it's maybe a goal for the next 2-3 years, don't wait until that time to start. So if you want to come to Canada in 2 years, don't wait until 2 years' time to start looking about the process. It can take that 2 years, depending on where you're going to be starting or which program you're going to be applying for. I always say that the immigration process, the whole process, it's more of a marathon than it is a sprint, okay? There are some that will take a shorter period of time, but there are others that will take a longer time. But generally, it's something that will take time. So right. So like Kevin is saying, I don't know if you're saying you want to go to Canada next month, have realistic expectations. You do want to plan ahead. It does require some planning, and make sure that you're utilizing the correct strategy. That's also very important. It's not going to happen overnight. So don't come with the overnight expectation. I want to make sure that you guys can be set up for success and that you have the right expectation going into the process. With the credential evaluation, you do want to evaluate your highest credentials. And if you have more than one, depending on what that is, you can evaluate more than one of them. We recommend that couples apply individually if at all possible. It may not be possible for everyone. And don't wait until you have all your proof of funds to get started. This is going to be relative to where you are. It depends on where, if you need the 13,000 proof of funds, where are you right now, right? If you're starting at 0 with your proof of funds and you're going into maybe like a program like Express Entry, depending on what your score is, I might say, well, don't start until you have accumulated at least some or the majority or can have access to. So it's going to be, relative to each individual situation. I'm going to go to my next slide, this one is going to actually be a case study that I'm going to share with you guys. So do let me know once you can. Just give me a thumbs up or something in the chat once you can hear it. And it's going to be a case study about a past a client of mine. One we're actually still working with, and in another one we've finished our engagement, but at least you can hear from not just me, but real clients that we've worked with who may have been in the situation that you are in, and who have successfully come to Canada right now. All right. So let me go ahead and do that. Just give me a thumbs up once you guys can hear.
My name is Vincent Grant. I'm a Jamaican who transitioned to Canada with the assistance of Northern Connection Immigration Canada under the guidance of Kay, the lead consultant there. In 2016, my common law partner and I at the time were growing more and more fed up of the standard of living in Jamaica. We both graduated from UWI and were working as professionals in our fields. Myself as an auditor and my partner as an investment manager at an investment house back home. And we just needed a new way forward, you know. We're tired of the hand-to-mouth living, so to speak, right? We heard about Northern Connections back then from a friend who I was working with and had recently been accepted to further his studies. So we both more or less had a similar educational background. And the more he spoke about the process he went through with Kay and her team, for me, I was encouraged, you know. I considered the quick turnaround time in acceptance that he had as, you know, our first sign to say, you know what, let me try and book an appointment. So I spoke of this all with my partner, and a few days later, we booked an appointment with Kay. And I can truly say, after that first consultation, I felt some feeling of renewed energy to get this process to its next level, you know. I don't know, it was a mix of things for us in that first meeting. Just positively had us on our toes to try and get all our documentation together, as we had now decided to retain her services to do what needed to be done. We didn't want to take the chance and miss anything that was necessary to be included to get our acceptance in at the first try. So we saw it necessary to solicit Kay's service. Also, I think it's important to note, you know, we did our feasibility studies about how much it would cost to retain Northern Connection services to go past first consultation. I was really surprised that even local consultants in Jamaica were much more expensive than what Northern Connections was charging at the time, which is a Canadian-based company. It was a no-brainer for us, you know. To be a little more transparent, my partner had contacted a very popular immigration service that is advertised heavily back home and accredited in Jamaica before we even heard about Kay services. And we did our first consultation with him and didn't hear about the many other routes we could have taken, which we qualified for. And in my opinion, we paid an arm and a leg to hear a quarter of the information Northern Connections leveled with us in the first consultation. So after that experience, we didn't hesitate to retain our service. I'm going to give you guys a little more insight about the path Kay and Northern Connections executed for my now wife and I to be Canadian citizens, having come here on a student visa and a work permit, and an open work permit, sorry. So we had retained her services, and you know, speaking to Kay in those initial stages, she was very knowledgeable and very transparent with us, you know. Even at that introductory level of choosing programs, there were so many programs my spouse and I qualified for, which made us confused as to which was the best option. And in speaking to Kay, I was able to get more clarity on program choice and what that looks like and which was the best option for me, for us, you know. My other concern was cost, you know. Did I need to do a 1-year program, a 2-year program, or a longer course? And what would that cost look like, you know? Kay suggested to me, I never forget this, Kay suggested to me that I do a 1-year postgraduate diploma. Yes, 1 year. And I was like, are you sure? And her response to me was, can you afford the cost of a 2-year program and all that comes with it, cost of living? And with that, you know, with that confidence that she had, we took the leap of faith and went that route. Of course, you know, a big factor for us, coming from the Caribbean, is that ever-changing and fluctuating exchange rate. So what she did for us, she shortlisted the 3 best options, school options to achieve our objective, right? Fast forward a bit, we picked a school in Saskatchewan, where my application was submitted in November of 2016. And by early January 2017, we had gotten acceptance into the school. The next step was to apply for the study permit, I believe. which Northern Connections again ensured to gather all our documentation and submit on our behalf. It was around April 2017 when Kay communicated that she had submitted the study and work permit application. And by the tail end of July 2017, within the same year, we had gotten a call out of the blues from the Canadian Embassy wanting to confirm if we had indeed submitted a file. Now, when we got that call, oh man, my spouse and I were very excited, that things seemed as if, they must be in process then, if they're calling us. And, by mid-August, a local prayer company contacted me saying that I had a package from the Canadian Embassy, which they had for. So I knew that, yes, the goal is on its way, So this package had our passports, the study permit and the work permit letter of approval. So the long and short of it at this point now, Kay has handled the application for the study permit, the work permits, and they were successful. And my now wife and I came to Canada. I have completed my 1-year postgraduate diploma in accounting. I've also gained employment in my field while studying. So following the end of my studies, I was granted a 1-year work permit. I continued to work for the same company through that work permit. My partner and I were able to apply before the end of that 1 year after studying for permanent residency. And we also extended our work permits for another 1 year, which Kay and her team handled, right? So it might sound a little complex, but all of that, we didn't do anything. We just, with the confidence we had coming here and things worked out at that point, we just kissed off the next steps we needed to do and she guided us. And today I can say that Kay's company took us the whole way through the whole process. She did the study permit, the work permit application, the extension of our work permits, and the submission of our permanent resident applications. Now, for that, we had actually applied to 2 programs, the Saskatchewan Immigrant Nominee Program and the Canadian Experience Class through Express Entry Program. That one came through the quickest for us at the time. And the Canadian Experience Class came through the quickest for us, the Express Entry, and we proceeded with that. And now, within the last 12 months, I can say that Kay has successfully dealt with our citizenship application. So we are now considered Canadian citizens. So I wanted to share this process, this experience, because I joined sessions a few nights ago, and I saw where a lot of people are concerned about the length of programs that you should choose and, the best way to be guided, And I received the right guidance in working with Kay and her company. And I would definitely recommend her as a consultant for you to pursue your own transition. She didn't ask me to do this. I felt led to share my experience. So if you're looking to make that move to Canada, this is definitely the way to go. And if it has worked for me, I'm sure it can work for you and yours. So thanks, Kay. From my family to yours, just want to thank you and your team that you guys have really gone above and beyond to ensure that we are permanently here and we're enjoying life in Canada. Thank you.
All right, so that was a recording. Vincent, who's actually a former client of ours, he was in one of our webinars and he shared that. So that was his experience. I have one more that I'll share with you, but before I go there, I'm just gonna recap. So we looked at Canada's immigration levels plan, Express Entry. We looked at some provincial nominee programs, a high-level overview of those programs. We looked at the different factors that will contribute generally to the immigration success and different program pools. So we looked things, the work experience, the language, education. We looked at settlement funds, all of those that will come together to form the basis for in the different program pools. And remember, we're touching permanent residency through economic immigration programs tonight. So it is not something that I can say is exhaustive, but it will give you a really good picture of what the grand scheme of immigration looks like. Now, in terms of what we've covered so far, I'd love to hear from you in the chat. What would you say was one of your biggest aha moments from this webinar? What would be a key takeaway for you before I go to the next one? Let me know in the chat. So somebody says start early. All right, starting early is definitely very important. Start before you're ready. Open knowledge and a lot of information. Applying. I see some of you are sending them directly to me. Different programs and opportunities. All right. So I'll go on to my next slide, which is where do we go from here? Where do I start? And I saw some questions that I will also take the opportunity to address. I'll address some of them that you guys posted. So to wrap all of this up, and like I said, I'll share another case study with you because I think those also will help with you seeing for yourself, visualizing yourself in Canada. When you can see how it has worked for somebody else, then you can at least identify with some of the things that they're saying, and also be able to see how the process itself could work for you. It has to transform, though, from just being a desire or a dream to be an actual goal that you work on actively, that you work towards. Like I said, the process can take time. It will just depend on the pathway that is recommended for you, that you are going on, and it will depend on you, the individual, your background. It can depend on your family and the logistics of all of that. Sometimes when we're working with even couples, we're often looking at who would be the better one to take the lead with the application. So there are different factors that are to be considered in the overall process, right? And so what I have, and I saw some of you had the question, I told you I'll get to it in the end. What I have for you here is for us to assist you with this particular process, whether it is permanent residence or looking at other pathways. So we have temp to perm pathways that I will touch on tomorrow. So make sure you don't miss the session tomorrow. But generally, for us to work with you in any capacity, it starts with an initial consultation. And that's what I have on the screen. Our initial consultation link is nccanadaimmigration.com. And we are offering, just for webinar attendees tonight, a 10% off our permanent residence and general consultations. Once they are booked within 24 hours, the promo code, which is PRConsult24, would still be valid. Will be valid for that 24-hour period. And the consultation session, what we really do is to look at your particular situation. So we're looking at your background to see what programs might be best suited for you based on that. So we look at what's happening with your particular background, your family size, what is your particular timeline, where would you fit in terms of the overall programs. So we're looking at all of that to assess where you are and what would be the best way to basically get you to Canada. The particular pathway, like I mentioned, is going to be different for each person. It's going to be very different for each person. Typically, I don't generally work with a client unless I know the background, unless I can do a consultation, and then I can, from there, devise a plan, an immigration strategy plan, and that we can work towards executing based on your particular. So it's usually the first step in getting a customized plan to make sure that you have everything that you need, goals, timelines, and so on, cost, and all of that. That will help you to go through that immigration process. That's how we have done with the clients that we have currently, very successfully, and it has worked really well. So I will play that additional case study for you, but before I do that, I saw some really interesting questions, some of which I'll cover today, some I'll The majority, though, I will cover tomorrow as time permits. So somebody's saying I will be 51 next month, and my daughter will be 20 years old this year. What are our chances for migration? That's a very general question, though. I don't know enough about you to be able to really say what your chances are. And that is where the actual consultation comes in, where we make that evaluation. We can, so generally with the consultation process, you'll get an intake form to complete that will give us some background info before we even start the session. And then during the session, we'll go through that in more detail. And so we can understand what's happening with your background. We can look in great detail based on education and work experience. We can look at all of that. And then we can identify which particular pathway of all of them that I may have touched on. Of course, the presentation is high level, so it's not going to touch on every single pathway. So we will be able to look at that and then make that determination. For your daughter who's 20, she is still within that age of dependent. So you definitely want to make sure that anything that you are doing, you do it before she gets to 22. Because once they get to 22, they're no longer considered a dependent, and she would have to figure out her own way of getting to Canada. So that's one of the beauty of when you can take the lead and they can be included on your application as well. So that would be my recommendation. Any PNP programs for finance. Finance is also very broad. So generally how Canadian immigration programs work, we have something that's called the NOC. So we have to look at your particular job that you're doing or background, your work history really, and determine what NOC, it's NOC for short, or NOC. The correct term is National Occupational Classification, which is a system that's used in government here in Canada and for immigration purposes to help with determining where you would fall in terms of your work experience. So we have to identify that. So it's going to be based on the occupational code for the work experience that you have. So it's not going to be like a broad finance. It's going to be the specific roles that will determine PNP programs or programs generally. Can you apply for a Canadian visa? Well, we didn't touch on visas today, so I'm not going to touch on that question. What do they do to verify years of experience? Job letter. That's a good question. So to verify work experience, yes, there will be documents. One of them would definitely be a job offer. It's I can't say it's the only document or it's an exhaustive list, but one of them definitely would be a job letter. There will be other documents that they would ask for as well. So we generally would compile a list of documents that are required based on the application type. For some applications, for example, they ask you for a government source proof, while others may not ask for that. So it just depends on the particular program. But yeah, they do ask for, you have to provide documents to verify your work experience. Some of these questions, I don't have enough context to really be able to provide an intelligent answer or a comprehensive answer, so I may not be able to. Somebody asking, do you have to take a language test? Well, I did cover that part during my presentation. Now, how do I pay for a consultation? So for a consultation, you would visit the link that we have. I think it's still on the screen. So you'll visit the link on the screen, our website, nccanadaimmigration.com, and you can actually pay online. So you'll see the different forms of payment that are there. What else? Which program is best for persons in environmental field? Again, it will just depend on your particular occupation, the specific occupation. So it's not like so broad. It will just depend on the particular NOC. And the number of years of experience that you have in the particular NOC. So sometimes you may work in a general field, like even in healthcare, you may work in healthcare generally, but then you may work as a nurse in 1 year, and in another year, you may work as a pharmacy assistant or something, and you may have matriculated into something different. So we will look at the individual positions, and that will help to determine where you would fall as well. And which program, because programs will always have eligibility requirements and criteria that you must meet. And somebody was asking about recording. So the session is being recorded. So we will be posting the recordings. I don't have a timeline for that just yet, but we will have the recordings at some time after the 2 days of sessions. All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and go back to that last one.
My name is Rolana, and I'm a Jamaican, so I live in Jamaica. And as Kay mentioned earlier, I am a current client of Northern Connections. So just like you, I am an aspirant who wants to migrate to Canada with my family. And I started my journey over 2 years now. And my husband and I, we were looking on Canada as an option because, we wanted better opportunities for careers, for education, in terms of healthcare, simply put, a better standard of living. So initially, I started my journey by myself, gathering all the information that I could get. And based on what I gathered, and I will say based on the lack of knowledge that I had, I thought that the best option was only for me to migrate to Canada was only through the express entry system or through school. So to qualify my information, I booked a consultancy. This was not with Kay, this was with another consultancy. And based on my profile, the consultants recommended for me to go back to school to do a master's in business analytics for a year, and that cost about 32,000 Canadian, which, of course, is expensive. But interestingly, to get into that course, I had to take one of those standardized tests, a test that is called GMAT, very different from what we would have learned in the Caribbean in terms of reading comprehension and mathematics, etc. So I took the test and I failed twice. And so I did not meet the minimum requirement to even migrate through that pathway. But by now, what was happening is that by studying for the exams, etc., for GMAT, a year had now passed. And so, as Kay said earlier, the older you get, sometimes you are not so attractive for all the programs anymore. But one day, last December, I was scrolling on the internet and I saw that Kay was offering a free Zoom session. So I joined because it was free, no cost. And I also saw that at the end of the session, there was a Q&A session, which I thought was pretty cool because I was not paying for it. But while Kay was presenting, she said two things that stood out for me. One, she said that there was over 80 immigration programs. And I said I must be eligible for one of those. And two, she also said that if I take a client's portfolio and I work with a client, there is a probability that that client may get through. She will always say, though, that she's not the one that makes the final decision. The government does it. But if she believes that you have a strong case, a strong profile, that's the only way that she would take that case. And for me, what that translated was that this was I would not be wasting my money. So I booked my consultation in last December with Kay. And based on my profile, she recommended that I would be suitable for the Saskatchewan PNP program. She did not mention school. What I can tell you is that when you work with Kay and her team, you will see progress in your journey. And it is, specific progress, the progress that you are looking for as an aspirant. So in December, I booked my consultation with Kay, and I can tell you by February, I was in the pool for Saskatchewan. And then in March, I went into the express entry pool, all with the assistance of Kay. I am still in the pool, I am still waiting, but in the meantime, I am learning French. Because I know that by learning French, and I will say that learning French is not easy, but it is indeed doable based on your motivation. So by learning French, I know that I will be able to get more points in these pools. And two, when I land in Canada, there will be better opportunities for me and my family. So I am learning French, and if you ever want to, if in your journey, you want to learn French, there are a few things that I would have learned, even that, learning French is a different story. But, I've learned some secrets about learning it. And if you want to hear from a learner, not from an instructor, if you want to hear from a learner, you just reach out to Kay and she'll reach out to me and I'll do your best to help you. If you decide that French will make a difference for you. Based on my experience, I can truly vouch that you are in the right place at the right time. Attend all the sessions. Attend them, or if you can't attend them, make sure you watch the replay to see what applies to you. From there, book your consultancy with Kay and her team. For me, I can tell you that I chose a full representation package. And let me explain why. There's so much information available on the web about migrating to Canada, but I needed help. I needed help to filter that information. And I needed that help from someone who was knowledgeable about Canadian immigration law. I needed also, I will always have questions. I will personally tell you, I always have something to ask Kay. And so I needed somebody that I could just talk to at any time. If something changes in the law, if I see something new happening in Canada, I just wanted somebody to talk to. I guess that's just, somebody to give me a little comfort that I'm still eligible. I also did not want to make any mistakes because, as you know, mistakes can be costly. And finally, I needed to always know that there was someone in Canada that was always looking out on our behalf. Okay, I can truly say that based on all that we have done so far, and I think one of the things that we did that really impressed me is when we were putting together the documents and we were, reviewing my job description, my years of experience, and deciding on the NOC code, and just your availability was impressive for me. You have always been there to support, to guide, and to motivate. You are truly a genuine person, a genuine consultant. What makes you different, Kay? What makes you different? And I would have spoken to, I don't know if anybody is like me, but I would have spoken to more, maybe 3 or 4 consultants. What makes you different, Kay, is that personalized touch that you add to our conversations. If I have a phone call with you, I hear the care in your voice. Your emails, the WhatsApps, they're just personalized, and that makes a difference for me. I truly believe that you have my family and I, our best interests at heart. And most times I feel that if you had the opportunity to approve our application, that we would have been there already in Canada. So thank you so much, Kay. My family, we appreciate all that you have been doing for us. Thank you so much for your support. Because I can tell you, sometimes when you're waiting in a pool, you get discouraged. It's always good to have support, and support from somebody that you know is looking out on your behalf. My encouragement to everyone, continue to dream. Keep focused on your Canadian dream. It can happen. Continue to dream. Don't stop dreaming. Work towards it. If there's something for you to do, do it. I promise you. I know that I want French. I am doing it. And sometimes I tell you, I want to sleep. I don't want to study. But I keep pushing on because I want this for me and my family. So continue dreaming. Your road may be easier than my road, right? But I do hope that one day we'll see each other in Canada. Thank you so much, Kay.
All right, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. That's where we wrap up. Rolana and her family is actually here in Canada. And she did not need to, it wasn't through French. She didn't, I'm not even sure if she's still learning French, but I know she is actually here. It was not through French. So we actually figured out a different, as I told you, programs are always changing. There are different pathways that can be taken. So her and her 3 children and her husband, so they're all here in Canada right now. So thank you for joining and have a good night. Hopefully I will see you all tomorrow again for day 2 of the sessions.